There are some recent trends that are concerning Knicks fans, but there is a very, very clear reason that explains exactly what is going on, and we will be breaking it down. What's up, guys? I'm Matt Long. Welcome to Knicks Basketball 365. If you're a fan of the New York Knicks, hit that subscribe button. But getting into the news for today, coming from Sports Illustrated, Karl-Anthony Towns finished with 15 points and 18 rebounds, but his game looked completely off offensively. He shot just 2 for 8 from three-point range and committed frustration fouls that hurt the team in critical moments. The biggest red flag was Towns picking up silly fouls when he was frustrated. This forced him to the bench in the third quarter when the Knicks desperately needed scoring, especially with Jalen Brunson resting. Without Towns on the floor, the offense completely stalled and Miami pulled away. So these comments are, of course, in response to Karl-Anthony Towns' offensive struggles versus the Miami Heat in the New York Knicks' third game of the season. But the thing that we got to think about is players, offensive players. One, they have bad shooting nights. Two, Karl-Anthony Towns has always had problems committing fouls. And three, the New York Knicks have a new head coach. Did you think that was just going to magically work perfectly immediately? If you did, you were completely wrong. When you get a new head coach, you got to ask yourself, how many games are we going to give the New York Knicks to figure this thing out and to mesh and get everything moving properly? They only need to have it working in the playoffs, but you got to figure out before you start getting worried, how many games are you going to give them? If your answer was only 3 games, they had to show you everything, then that was completely unrealistic. But first, talking about Karl-Anthony Towns, yes, he is the best three-point shooting big man in the history of the NBA. Yes, he is a fantastic offensive weapon who struggles on the defensive side of the basketball, whether it's effort, whether it's a lack of defensive skill. We're not here to talk about that, but what we are here to talk about is Karl-Anthony Towns not shooting well enough against the Miami Heat and overall to start the season. But the way I would describe that is shooters get hot and cold, and Karl-Anthony Towns historically has one of the best track records we've ever seen shooting the ball. So we really have no reason to believe that anything crazy is going on with Karl-Anthony Towns. We just have only seen 3 games. He has not been in a slump for the whole season or anything like that. Karl-Anthony Towns, this can be easily explained away by just Karl-Anthony Towns is a good shooter who has had some bad games. Any shooter in the NBA has bad games. Even Steph Curry has off nights. Well, maybe not Steph Curry, but anyone other than Steph Curry has off nights. It happens in the NBA. If everyone was on every single night, then the league would just be too easy. So that's obviously not possible. Karl-Anthony Towns, don't worry about 1 or 2 games being bad. I mean, he's going to turn this thing around. Also, the fouls wise, he's always had a problem committing fouls. They're just stupid. He gets frustrated. A lot of the times he feels like, well, first of all, Karl-Anthony Towns is one of the worst whistles I've ever seen watching basketball. So a lot of the times he feels like he's not getting calls on the offensive boards, and he takes it out on the other team when he's playing defense on them and gets fouls. And sometimes he gets some bad whistles defensively, but usually his bad whistles are offensively, which lead him to getting frustrated and going, you want to see a foul? Here's a foul. And then he commits something dumb. Like game 2, we watched him, I think it was OG Anunoby, drove from the far corner and Karl-Anthony Towns pulled someone's arm away from him so he couldn't close out on OG. Like, that's really stupid. The officials are going to catch that every single time. These guys are right on the floor. They got good eyesight. They're going to see you committing a dumb penalty like that. And when you're Karl-Anthony Towns, someone who has foul troubles, you can't get caught in that foul trouble because then you're going to be put on the bench. And just like the article said, we need Karl-Anthony Towns on the floor, especially when Jalen Brunson isn't on the floor. Brunson had 37 against the Miami Heat, but it was not the Miami Heat versus the Miami Heat, but it was not enough to raise the New York Knicks. And over to new head coach Mike Brown's offensive scheme for the Knicks. This guy is someone who has had tremendous offensive success in the past. His Sacramento Kings were lighting up the scoreboard every single night a couple years ago, but when you come to a new team, you have new personnel. Currently, we are watching the New York Knicks every single night. The rotation has been different because we're just starting the season, and every single coach in the league, even the guys who have been there for multiple years, are feeling out their rotation and figuring out what does the 2025 version of my team look like. So it's not just the New York Knicks that are struggling with, not everything not looking perfect. There are only 2 undefeated teams currently in the Eastern Conference. So then, like, it's not bad to be 2-1. It's not a red flag yet that the offensive game for the New York Knicks wasn't that good for one game. The New York Knicks are going to have plenty of time to work this out. The great thing about basketball is when you have a series at the end of the year before the playoffs, home court advantage for one game isn't the end of the world. They're going to have time to work it out. If they are very good at the end of the year and they're all able to mesh together over the course of the year and then they figure it out at the end, then all you got to do is outplay those guys in those series, and the better team's going to win. That's what happens when you were playing a best of 7 instead of one game. It takes out a lot of uncertainty and makes it so usually the better team wins. So the Knicks, they're going to have all the time in the world to put this thing together and figure it out in the end. Now, moving on to the other part of this article where they're talking about the bench struggling, they're absolutely right. In this game versus the Miami Heat, game 3, only 8 points off the bench was our leader, was Jordan Clarkson, and 0 for Landry Shamet, Tyler Kolek with 5, Jordan Clarkson with 8, pretty good. Josh Hart with 6, and then Gershon Yabusele, only 2 points off the bench. 2 of the 3 games for Yabusele, he has not put up a lot of points, not shooting well. If we look at the 3-point shooting from the bench, they were a combined 1 for 8, 10, 18. 1 for 18 from 3-point land was the New York Knicks bench. We have better shooters than that. Clarkson's a shooter. Shamet's a shooter. We're going to see what Kolek does. I was saying his shot wasn't good in the summer, but then he came out and kind of proved me wrong game 1. So we're going to see what Tyler Kolek's shot looks like over the course of the season while he continues to develop. But this is not going to happen. 1 for 18 shooting off the bench 3-point wise. It's not going to happen. We can chill out. This Knicks team, we can't say for sure that they're going to figure it out, but we have a pretty good feeling that with a former coach of the year in Mike Brown coming in, an offensive-minded guy coming in, joining a roster that is very, very good offensively, has some great offensive players like Jalen Brunson, like Karl-Anthony Towns, and whatever Mikal Bridges decides to be that night. He could be amazing. He could be awful. You never know when it comes to Mikal Bridges, but this team has a ton of offensive talent, and they just need a little bit of time to mesh, like every team in the NBA. And it's a little bit harder because they have a new head coach who hasn't played with these guys, and they say, you don't really know what you have until you've seen all the guys out there together on the court in a real game situation. Practice, as much as you like to make it feel like and function like a real game, it's not a real game. And it is difficult and it's not even difficult, it's impossible to replicate real game circumstances in a practice. You don't have the same pressure from the fans. You don't have the same unpredictable situations. And these players, they're going to need real games to get to know what themselves are going to be this year, what their head coach expects of them, and what their head coach can get out of them, and what the team is going to look like this season. And speaking of what we have this season, tough game in primetime versus the Milwaukee Bucks against Giannis Antetokounmpo. But after that, schedule really opens up for the New York Knicks. 3 games in a row against some pretty, we think the Chicago Bulls are going to be a bad team, but they are one of those 2 undefeated teams left in the Eastern Conference. But you have to imagine a tanking team like Chicago. Montas Buzelis looks really good, but outside of that, they don't have a whole lot of talent on that team. Should be 2 wins for the New York Knicks, following that up with a home game versus the Washington Wizards, and then Wednesday, November 5th. So pretty much a little bit over 2 weeks from now, Minnesota, who's going to be down Anthony Edwards. That's a pretty winnable game as well for the New York Knicks, but they are going to have plenty of time to get this thing worked out. I would urge people, don't judge the the rotations or the way the team meshes until at least 15 games in. That's even that might be not enough time, but this team is talented. They're going to get this thing figured out. Karl-Anthony Towns is most likely not going to get the fouls figured out because that's not who he's been as a player. He's been in the league for a decade and he hasn't figured it out. So he's not going to get that out of his game. Karl-Anthony Towns, at this point, he is what he is, but what he isn't is a bad shooter. So a bad shooting night, it's a bad night for Karl-Anthony Towns. It's not a bad sign of what's to come in his career. His shooting will be just fine. The fouls are going to be just as bad as they have been in the past. And Mike Brown is going to find a way to work this offense together and bring this whole team closer together to bring us to our ultimate goal, the NBA Finals, and hopefully an NBA championship. But that's what I got for this video. So if you stuck around this long, thank you for watching. Hit that like button if you haven't already. Hit the subscribe button if you're new to the channel, and go Knicks.